I think it's pretty fair to say that creating comics is definitely a labour of love. All of the time storyboarding, all of the time coming up with characters, all of the intricate details put into each and every frame. They are passion projects through and through, but unfortunately that passion can wane somewhat when they hit the shelves. As across the timeline of the comic book industry, you can definitely see examples of when creators turn sour on their projects. So let's take a look at them today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 classic comics that were hated by their creators. Number 8. Deadpool: Sins of the Past. With Deadpool being a sleazy, creepy, gross kind of character in his early days, it's fair to say that his second miniseries writer, Mark Waid, felt less than entirely comfortable over-detailing the character's questionable exploits, as was uncovered in an interview that he had with Wizard magazine in 1997. Now, while this seems bizarre now, as now that Deadpool is arguably more a genuine hero than an anti-hero most of the time in modern comics, back in the day, he was capable of some pretty reprehensible things. And although it's not as though Waid writing Deadpool in character was him saying that these things were okay, it is understandable that the writer was perhaps uncomfortable with trying to get into the mercenary's mindset, as Deadpool has experienced some considerable character development since this time. Sins of the Past is arguably one of the first Deadpool comics that any fan needs to read in order to understand this character. However, seeing this much colder, crueler version of Deadpool, it's readily apparent why Waid may have not enjoyed working on this series as much as we may have enjoyed reading it. Number 7. Death in the Family. So picture this, you're a successful comic book creator in the 80s, your work is well received and you're respected among your peers. So respected that, when you suggest killing off a major superhero sidekick in a vote, people actually agree to it. Well, it sounds great, right? But here's the kicker. You then decide that actually that's probably a bad idea because it could lead to a major fan outrage and could sabotage the superhero himself. Only now it's too late because the vote is already live and it's starting to look like you're going to have to kill a character that you actually now don't want to. This was the very real scenario for comic book writer Dennis O'Neil, who organised a vote to kill Jason Todd in the Death in the Family series, before having an understandable crisis at how fans would react to them brutally murdering a pubescent child. O'Neil's concerns reached the extent that he actually voted against Todd's death in the poll, as would later be reported in comic history books like The Caped Crusader, in a desperate attempt to ensure that the young Robin would actually survive, only for more fans to then vote for him to instead die. Now that Death in the Family is as renowned as it is, it's likely O'Neil has recovered from his concerns over killing Jason Todd off. With his reputation and Batman's success on the line though, it's sure that there was a good portion of time where the famed Batman scribe regretted having ever suggested the idea in the first place. Number 6. Daredevil: Frank Miller's run. Before the days of Miller's more questionable work on The Dark Knight Strikes Again and All-Star Batman and Robin, it's undeniable that he was a crucial influence on an unimaginable amount of franchises. Of these franchises, his absolute most seminal work has to be that on Daredevil, managing to create the version of Daredevil that we know to this day dangerously close to single-handedly. However, this doesn't mean that this road to success started easy. Starting in 1979, Miller began work on this series as an artist, taking over from Gene Colan. Unfortunately, the series was struggling in sales during this time, and when it failed to improve with Miller in the team, Marvel began discussions about cancelling the entire series. Aware of this predicament, Frank Miller would grow increasingly frustrated with the series writer, Roger McKenzie, as he felt that the man's scripts were a large part of the problem that this comic was facing, leading the artist to consider quitting the project entirely. While this could have grown into a far more serious problem, Denny O'Neil sympathised with Miller and thus moved Roger onto another project, allowing Frank to begin writing for the series instead. And look what happened. Number 5. The Killing Joke. Perhaps the single funniest thing about The Killing Joke is that after all of the fame and acclaim that it's received, Alan Moore still regards it with the verbal equivalent of a shrug. When asked about his personal opinions of the graphic novel, Moore stated that he didn't think it was a very good book, citing the lack of relatability that he felt that Batman and the Joker had to the real world and real life experiences. On a similar level, the writer also expressed concern in a 2006 interview with Wizard magazine about the plot point of paralyzing Barbara Gordon, as he retrospectively appears to regard the decision as one made more to push boundaries than out of a need for it to be included in the comic. While fans across the world still adore The Killing Joke, and the fact that it's still one of the most iconic comics in DC's arsenal, Moore will likely stay lukewarm on his creation indefinitely. Number 4. Spider-Man: One More Day. One of the most interesting details about the ever-controversial One More Day Spider-Man title is that it managed to prove as contentious with the team creating it as it did with readers. When Marvel's editor-in-chief Joe Quesada decided to retcon Peter Parker's marriage, it was naturally met with mass uproar. As Peter and Mary Jane had been married through many different key storylines, One More Day essentially retconned years of Spider-Man's history, seemingly only to make sure that the character stayed hip and fresh by not settling down with a long-term partner. While the storyline came as a surprise to many readers, the issue became interesting on a real-world level when it was revealed that the comics writer, J. Michael Straczynski, was also frustrated with how the series turned out. Straczynski stated in an interview that there's a lot I don't agree with. I'm going to take my name off the last 2 issues of the One More Day arc, with him only deciding against it after being talked down by Quesada. Though it appeared at the end of the day that there wasn't any bad blood between the two, it's readily apparent that the series was as problematic for its creators as it was for irritated fans, which may explain why its legacy today is one of ire. Number 3. The Infinity Gauntlet. One of the most underrated talents that any comic book writer or artist possesses is patience, not only for their time-consuming craft, but also for the people that they're working alongside, as any executive decisions about the comic are first and foremost a matter between them. This is the exact reason that Infinity Gauntlet became a matter of contention between its creators, because the comic's first artist, George Perez, was also working on DC's War of the Gods at the time. He became frustrated with the length of Jim Starlin's scripts, which he said in the book Modern Masters was the cause of him falling behind on illustrating the project. Perez would be replaced by Marvel artist Rom Lim from issue number 4 onwards, although George would then ink Lim's covers for the rest of the series. While the series' first artist appears to hold no grudge against those he worked with, it's clear that the series was a great source of frustration for him during his time illustrating it, which is perhaps why he bore no ill will against Lim when he took over. Number 2. The Clone Saga. The poster child for development hell, Clone Saga was rife with issues between Marvel creators from the beginning. Firstly, the series' big bad Judas Traveler wasn't properly defined for writers at the start of their work on the comic, meaning that his purpose within the series often felt incredibly unclear. Similarly, creative staff were profoundly displeased at the way the plot was to unfold, both in that Peter Parker was supposed to be replaced by Ben Reilly and the sheer amount of clones introduced, which was just going to actively complicate the Spider-Man series. The second argument was especially a sore spot for many who'd agreed to work on the series, as the Clone Saga was initially sold to writers and artists as a way to simplify the Spider-Man universe, whereas in practice it would only serve to embroil the franchise in even more turmoil. After several people were fired or quit due to the complications of the storyline, the Clone Saga would eventually be closed, with almost everything packed back into the status quo by the series' climax. It was a displeasure for those who worked on it, because either way, the saga would live on, and all that they would see forever was its huge wasted potential. And number 1, Watchmen. As perhaps the single most iconic and recognizable comic in all of history, it's naturally absolutely shocking to learn that The Watchmen is the subject of much hatred and anger for its creator Alan Moore instead of a source of considerable pride. Interestingly, unlike almost every other comic that's ended up as a subject of ire from its creator, Moore's frustration with Watchmen is simply something created entirely after the comic, generated by what he perceives as the company's refusal to allow him and Dave Gibbons the rights to their franchise. While Moore thought that the series would revert to being his in a year or two after the company ceased to use its characters, DC made sure to buy and use the franchise enough to keep it. Naturally, the company using his characters and concepts in ways that he didn't agree with riled the bearded creator, who has since developed a seemingly profound hatred for perhaps his crowning achievement in comics. And there we go, my friends. Those were 8 classic comics hated by their creators. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ with a 0, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice, that's Dice with a C, where I do all of my streaming outside of What Culture. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.